You said you're Kelly, one of the nurse case managers here?
Yes.
Okay. And handling the north side of
Yes,
hospital.
north side.
Let's take it back just a step. Tell me what an admission is and how does that work?
So basically, we'll get a referral from either a family, a hospital, a facility, one of the physicians for a patient that either the family, usually the family and the doctor have decided that they just want to take a palliative care route at this time. And then
A what care route?
palliative care.
Okay.
So just support, comfort, no invasive procedures. And then we'll go meet with them, do an evaluation. A nurse usually does an evaluation if we're uncertain whether they'd meet criteria. If not, then we just, our legals, our marketing team goes out, they sign all the legals, then our in-case manager will go out and assess the patient, do full assessment, neuro, musculoskeletal, cardiac, everything, and then admit.
Okay. What is some of that criteria?
It's different for every diagnosis.
Gotcha.
So dementia usually, or Alzheimer's, they've changed a lot of the diagnoses now. Medicare has, so we have to work with that. Usually assistance with more than 3 ADLs. There's a list of them. Cancer is one of the diagnoses that generally the person meets criteria if they have a diagnosis of cancer, usually regardless.
Do you see dementia as being the most common diagnosis that you
Not at this hospice. A previous hospice I worked for, I feel like that was probably 8 out of my 12 patients were dementia, Alzheimer's related. And then, but at this hospice, not really the case. I have patients with late effects, CVA, I have Alzheimer's, a lot of ALS. Our hospice is really known for ALS. So we get a lot of ALS patients and cancer, obviously.
At which point in a patient's care and diagnosis does it come time that they would reach out to a hospice or you would become involved and they would be admitted?
Generally, it's when, I guess, technically they have less than 6 months. However, that isn't always the case. If somebody gets a diagnosis like cancer, something like that, generally people will go through chemo, radiation, such and such. Once that is completed and say that they didn't react or the cancer has metastasized throughout the body and the doctor says, we can continue, however, the best route at this time is to probably sign on with hospice, be comfortable until they pass. And that's when the family will usually, or if an individual is at home and it's an Alzheimer's patient and they've just gotten to the point where they can't be at home anymore, it's usually at a point where the person can no longer function on their own. Mm-hmm. They need a lot of assistance, usually complete total care. Not always. And then they would, like I said, it's different for every diagnosis when you reach that point. But
right.
Alzheimer's can be a little tricky.
Yeah.
I think the biggest fear, I think, is I think when people hear hospice, there's a misconception that we're helping along the process. So people are fearful. If they hear morphine, that's an immediate, I've heard terrible things, and so there's usually a lot of explanations about what our job really is and what we're there to do is we're not there to speed up the process nor slow. We're there to simply make sure that individual is comfortable emotionally and physically and the family until they pass. And morphine, I think, is a big, like you said, people are so unaware that most of the patients that I've had that are on morphine, especially if it's scheduled for a long time, it's for shortness of breath. It's not even for pain. And I think people just immediately think death and severe pain with morphine. It's just not the case.
It's usually a very positive thing for women. Have you run across any negative issues or anything?
No, I haven't had any families have a negative experience. I've had certain families when they come on, like you said, they've got questions. Their aunt, their uncle, their whoever had a bad experience, so they're really nervous about the situation. You know, they believe that hospice really sped up the process, but it's usually, it all surrounds morphine, I feel like. That's such a big misconception.
Has hospice care changed in the past decade or so? Like, have any major changes occurred? The way I understood it when I was younger, maybe I was wrong, was that you go somewhere when it's time for hospice care. You guys don't do that. You go to the patient's home.
And I really can't speak that much about 10 years ago, but I know today, and there are still places that you can go. Places have in-house facilities. However, we go into their homes, so they don't have to move. A lot of our patients, they want to. We have a facility patients. We have a large number of those as well. But those patients who want to stay in their home, that's our goal. If that's one of their goals, then that's our goal, is to make sure that we put enough support around them that they can stay in the home. And of the home patients, we've never had to move one because it just wasn't working out and, to a facility. And we have enough support that the families or caregivers can go, can put the patient into respite so they can have a break emotionally and physically so that they can remain at home until they pass.
I imagine that you get a higher quality of life rating for the caregivers as well as the patient if you're coming into their home and taking off some of that burden and providing some assistance. Would you say that's the case?
Absolutely. That's part of it. I feel like that's a huge part, even for obviously for the social work and the spiritual counselors, that's huge. But for us as the RNs and the LVNs and the aides, it's such a huge part of what you do. You would never go into somebody's home, treat the patient, walk out, and that's it. That is just not, and that's part of the reason I'm here, is because that's what, in a hospital, you're not afforded the time to talk to the families and to get to know them and to know when to know when their birthday is, when their kids, see the pictures. You don't have that. And in hospice, a part of my job is talking on the phone to a family member and saying, it's gonna be okay and we're gonna be here every step of the way. And after they pass, to say, hey, we're not disappearing. We're still here.
Yeah.
For 13 months after, they can get hospice support from the spiritual counselors or social work, and we really try and get them to the right. Those people who the nurse or the spiritual counselor or social work think, hey, they're might red flag for they're gonna need a lot of support after, those people are really focused on to make sure that, they're grieving over the passing of their loved one. We don't want them to think that everything just dropped off on our end. So
sounds great.
One of my patients, he just was so sarcastic, really professionally successful and personally successful, and so witty, and so that never left. Even when he was at the end, when he could barely talk, he couldn't move anything on his body, he would come out with just the craziest remarks, and you would I would just shake from laughing so hard. And he's one of those people that there was a bond there. I will never forget him and that time. And I feel like some patients, you bond with all your patients in hospice. If you don't, then you shouldn't be there. But with some patients, there is just this, it's unexplainable.
Magic.
Yeah, absolutely.
How long have you been doing this?
Hospice about, I've been here a year in February, and before that, almost 2 years. Yeah.
What led you into it?
quite honestly, I was a floor nurse and a med-surg floor, really fast-paced. Like I said, I was just, and I knew I wanted to switch. I was like, you know, I went through nursing school and this is not what I wanted. I'm a people person. Like, this is just, and one of the girls I went to nursing school with sent a message out and said, you know, we need hospice nurses. And I thought, wow, I've never thought about it, and so it just kind of fell into my lap. And now she works here. Now we both moved over here. I can't see myself anywhere else than hospice nursing. I don't think I'd be very beneficial. I don't know.
That's great.
Anytime, right? 2 a.m.
How often are you at their house? Or
If it's just regular visits, I see my patients 2 times a week. But if they're declining really quickly and they require more care, we could go 5 days a week, 7 days a week. And on the weekends, there's nurses on call. And during I'm on call once a week or maybe once every other week. And so, like you said, if you get a distress call at 2 a.m., then you get up and you go and you stay with the family however long, and the patient to make sure everything is okay.
Sounds like you're good to have on the team.
Hope so.
Yeah.
So that's it?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
all.
Thank you so much. The first thing I would ask, Julian, is a lot of people, especially in my generation, might not know what hospice care truly is. What would you say to someone that had no idea about what a hospice is and what you do?
It's not just end-of-life care. I mean, a lot of times we do come in at the end of one's lives, but we're able to provide, we're able to maintain or improve a person's quality who has a terminal disease. And sometimes it's, well before that person actually starts to decline to where we consider them to be active. So I mean, it's nice that we have a full support of team. I mean, we've got spiritual care, we've got social work, the nurses, the CNAs, and so all of us come in and find ways that we can improve that person's quality of life. But I mean, it is symptom management that we do. It's not anything curative, but definitely improving the quality of. So I started off working at a nursing home, and I didn't really enjoy it. I actually quit working as a nurse 8 months after becoming one. I just didn't like that setting. And when I started working as a nurse again, I was working at a behavioral mental health facility, and it was okay. I just didn't really like it. But I spoke to one of our spiritual care workers, Sarah, and it was after she was there visiting one of her patients. And I was talking to her, and I was just letting her know how much I appreciated what hospice team members had done for the patients that I had seen who had hospice care. I didn't know if I would be a good fit for the team, though. I had reservations, but I did appreciate the fact that these ones came in, and whereas some nurses in facilities that kind of put hospice patients on the back burner, thinking, oh, they're dying, they don't need anything, they come in. Hospice team members are able to step in and not deal with the person as a patient, and like, all right, you've got all these diseases and symptoms, but they're able to go in and see them as an individual and see which ways they can bring a quality to their life, even though they don't have much quantity left. And so just wanted to be a part of that. Not seeing a person as their disease, but as an individual, and just showing love and care to individuals that we meet.
Sounds great. Can you give me some examples of quality of care that you feel that you've helped with? What are some examples of things that you do that improve the quality of care?
Yeah. So not seeing a person as their disease. I mean, we've got people who've got cancer and COPD, and not just going in and looking at their symptoms, but getting to know an individual. Spending more than 5 minutes doing an assessment. That brief nursing assessment, but finding out, what's going on in your life, what questions do you have, what family problems are going on that we can possibly help you with, and then finding out what people enjoy, so bringing those things back into their lives. We have a lot of people who are home by themselves all day, and so they don't get anyone to talk to. We had a patient out in Manor, and he loved playing cards, and he would have to wait until the end of the day for his family to come by and be able to play with them. And so After I had done my nursing visit, I would set up a game of rummy and we would play for a little while. And although he had Alzheimer's, when it came to cards, he was really sharp, and so there were many times where he beat me. But he just loved being able to socialize with people, being able to not have to focus on I've got all these diseases and I don't have much time left to live. But here's someone who's they're coming in and making sure that I'm alright health-wise, stable at least for the time being, and then they're taking an interest in me personally. When I started with New Century Hospice, initially I was just part-time, but when I realized that I liked it a lot more than what I was doing, I went ahead and quit those 2 other jobs and came on full-time.
So what do you find is the most common thing that families are nervous about or anxious about when they're starting with hospice?
So a lot of times people are given a prognosis of all right, you've got 6 months to live, or even shorter, and so families are constantly asking, well, how much time does mom or dad have left? And we don't focus on how much time they have left, but we're just there to make sure that they're comfortable during the time. And we do answer any other medical questions that they have. But just giving reassurance, a lot of teaching, signs and symptoms to look for with approaching death, how to manage symptoms. Although we're available 24/7, there are things that family members can do. Like if they call us at 2 in the morning, we're gonna say, hey, do this until I get there. And so, in addition to the teaching, we're also giving reassurance to families and patients.
Tell me how the job changes the closer it gets to the end, and how often are you there at the end, and what happens at that time?
When a person is considered pre-active or active, we usually increase our visits. Some families only want 1 or 2 visits a week, but we'll increase it to daily visits. Do a more comprehensive assessment. Check for modeling to the skin, check for irregular pulses and changes in their blood pressure, things like that. If the person is having increased difficulty swallowing, we may recommend changing the texture of the diet so that it's easier for them. If they're having difficulty swallowing, again, we might say, hey, let's thicken your fluid so that it's easier for you. Many people have increased or hypersalivation, so we'll provide medications for those, and so pretty much as each symptom comes up, we'll address it in a certain way, but not just medical. You mentioned the entire team. So sometimes the anxiety that people have is related to being estranged from their family members. So we've worked in the past with. We had a patient in South Austin whose son lived in Chicago, and he didn't even know that his dad was in Austin. So we worked with the facility that he was in, the social worker there, and we were able to get in touch with his son in Chicago, and his son was able to make it soon before his dad passed. So just reconnecting them. Sometimes there are family issues that need to be addressed, and our social workers deal with them. And if our patients and their families want to keep those private, then that's done. But even spiritual care. A lot of times people, they're not so much worried about the fact that they're dying, it's just, the unknown. And so finding out what their belief system is, and then giving them a firm hope for the future, it really brings them comfort and decreases their anxiety.
And you do that within the construct of the individual's belief system, whatever that is. That's nice. Yeah, you've been great, very helpful.
Exactly.
Yeah. What was your name?
Amanda.
Amanda, nice to meet you. How long have you been doing this?
I will be at New Century Hospice for 2 years in March.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
What led you to working in a hospice?
Ever since starting nursing school, I've always wanted to do hospice. Since day one. That's why I became a nurse in the first place.
Did you have a personal experience do you mind sharing?
Yes. My grandfather was real sick. He had colon cancer. And I'm from Boston originally, so family is very important to me. I've always been called Mom Amanda by my family. So they had hospice nurses, and they would come in and check on him, but the quality of care with them wasn't so good. And I saw my grandma struggling, I saw my grandpa struggling, and dropped out of college and took care of him. Learned how to do bed baths and all that stuff, and he passed away, and I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I've always talked about it with my dad for a long time. And he's like, you know what, you've always been a caregiver. You've always done that for your friends and your family. And I said, I think that's what I want to do. So ever since I went into nursing school knowing that I wanted to do hospice. I think the most memorable times is when we have patients that are very confused and they have beautiful lucid moments where they speak clearly. They talk about things that might not have happened recently, but they remember perfectly every detail, every single thing. When you go into somebody's home and you're meeting them and you're meeting their family, you really get to know the history of a person. And I just think it's beautiful. I think it's beautiful. I don't know. I love doing it. So I feel as if the dying process needs as much preparation as the beginning of life does. I feel like there's a lot of scary times. There's a lot of times where family members and patients are anxious and confused and not really knowing where to begin with hospice. When people think of hospice, they think of the end result, which is death. They don't think of the process and the journey towards that. And for me, education is very important. I always tell my family members every single time I see something new, every change, but it's not as scary if you have help. If you've never experienced it before and you're standing there with a family member that you love so much and you just don't know what to do, these new symptoms or these new changes that you see in your father or in a son even, it can be scary. And to be able to go in there and tell them and educate them on what's going on to help them calm down is really important. I think education is extremely important. It's scary. You see a lot of patients that are so scared that even though they are on hospice, there's a lot of denial in knowing what's going to be next and just talking them through it. You don't always have to talk about you being on hospice. There are patients that I don't even say that I'm a hospice nurse to them. I just go in there and visit with them. Sometimes people just need somebody to talk to that's not a part of their family, and that's something that I think is really important too. Just an open ear and an open heart, being adaptable to what the families do. I have a lot of patients that have cardiac problems. I have Alzheimer patients, but the main patients that really affect me the most are the ones that I usually have a lot of are ALS patients. Yeah, it's hard. I don't get emotional in front of the patients and the family members because I am professional, but it can get to you sometimes. We don't have hardened hearts. Just because we see it all the time doesn't mean it doesn't hurt more. But the thing at the end of the day, if I can help these patients feel comfortable and pass with a smile on their face sometimes, I've seen, it means more to me than anything in the world. Sorry. I'm very passionate about this.
It's wonderful.
I love this job.
I'm really blown away. You're the third person that's come in and talked about it. I'm really blown away by the passion and care. I think that speaks volumes about what you guys do.
I mean, I'm only 27 years old. Julian is only 25. We are very young nurses. I've only been a nurse for about 3 years. And most hospice nurses, they've been working in the field for longer than I've been alive for.
Yeah.
And the fact that Andy and Lori gave me the opportunity, because they saw it, that I would work so hard to make sure that people get the right end of life experience. Whether it's they want to drink themselves down into oblivion, whether they want to go with no medicine, it's all about being adaptable and knowing what the patient wants as well as what the family needs.
Balancing
emotionally. It's hard sometimes because I had a patient that was Muslim and he became Muslim when he was in prison, and he found out that he had colon cancer and had to get sent home. He went on parole. His sister was extremely Baptist and did not want anything to do with that religion. And when somebody starts actively passing away, it only takes about sometimes 1 to 3 days physically. 6 days, 7 days, 10 days, 12 days, he's still in the same. And we knew that there was something going on. It's all about teamwork too. Each patient has 4 team members, plus everybody else. If I have a question, I'm more than happy to call the other nurses, and they're always there to help me. But we had to try and balance those religions out in order to get what the patient needs. Because we are the patient advocates, but we also need to think about who is going to be there after. And we did the prayers, we did everything, and he passed away within minutes. So we kind of we work our buns off to try and make sure they get what they want, no matter how hard it is sometimes. Sometimes, I mean, sometimes you're working 16 hours a day, and if you don't have the heart for it and you don't have the passion for it, it's just not something that's going to work out. If sometimes when we work on call, there are days that you're up 2 days straight. And thankfully, the nurses here, it's just such a team and a camaraderie that, if I hadn't slept during the night, they'll let me sleep a little bit in the morning, but, you've got to get up and you got to be like, these people need me. These families need me, and this is what I'm here for.
That's great.
And like I said, because I am so young, I've never opened up a nursing book more than I have working here, because sometimes you're 60 miles out in the middle of nowhere. You have your brain, you have your heart, and you have your hands.
Yeah.
And those are the things that you really depend on in this job. And sometimes it might not be medically what they need at first, but your heart can tell certain things, and it's just a whole mixture of all 3, being able to use them together. And like I said, I can always ask somebody for help if I need it. I know that there's always somebody there to help me. So it's not just the patient getting one nurse, they're getting a whole team of doctors and nurses and everything else. So,
Cool.
Wow.
Good.
okay.
This time,
Cool.
yeah, that was
Thank
wonderful.
you.
Thank you so much. How long have you been a hospice nurse?
10 years.
10
Oh,
years.
wow.
Wow.
Yes.
What led you into this field?
I was a home health nurse for 20 years prior to that, and I really enjoyed that, and I was asked to go see if I could help hospice, and I fell in love with it even more, so stayed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I love it.
That's great. Can you tell us some of the things that made you fall in love with it, or that you love about being a hospice nurse?
Well, it's very special because families call you in at a very personal and vulnerable time in their lives. So there's a lot of anxiety and stress and lack of knowledge about the dying process. And in our culture, we put everybody in facilities or hook them up to machines, and not everyone wants to do that. And I see this as a way of everything going back to the way it used to be, when extended families lived together and took care of each other from the birth through the death. And I like that part because I was there solely for comfort. Sometimes in home health we had to go in and say, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this. Well, if I have a 90-year-old patient that says, I don't want to take my medication, so you're 90 years old, you don't have to. So I really like the fact that they are able to do what they want to do at end of life.
How do you see the difference working as a hospice nurse and allowing them that privilege versus maybe what you did in the past? What's the difference from the perspective of the patient that you can share?
It's a completely different mindset for anybody in the medical field, from nurses to physicians, because we're trained to do cure, treat, and patients don't necessarily want to do that. And I think there's been a problem with giving patients the options from the physician's end or the hospital end. I don't think they do that. They may be starting to do a little more, but I don't think they do that. They're so used to, let's do this and, give them hope. But some patients don't want to go through chemo. They don't want to do anything to prolong their life. They are ready to go. And so I like that I'm there to help educate them, educate the family, let them know the tools we have to keep them comfortable, but just let them, they're in charge. They can do what they want to do. So,
Sounds good.
yeah.
Tell me when I would call a hospice as a family member or a patient.
I think anytime you have been diagnosed with a life-threatening illness, even if you haven't been given a 6-month prognosis, it's a good time, I think, to get the information, because that's what we see a lot as we go out and we talk to people when we're finally called in, and one of the biggest things we hear is, oh, I wish I'd known about this sooner, because the longer they're on hospice, the more benefit they get from it. There's more time for us to help them resolve any, spiritual issues, whatever. It's just a really good, well-rounded program to address all their needs, not just physical, not just, socioeconomic, but spiritual. And a lot of times it's just the information to know the things that are going to happen, that they know ahead of time. If we say these are the symptoms you're probably going to have, and just so you know, when that happens, you'll know it's expected, it's normal. Because if people don't know that, and they walk in and someone has some difference in breathing, they panic. So just giving them the information up front so they know when these things happen, it's expected, and don't worry, anything that is uncomfortable, we'll take care of. We have the medications at hand to treat shortness of breath or pain or...
Why wouldn't anyone choose hospice, I guess, is the...
Well, there's a lot of misinformation out there. A lot of people think it speeds up death. Some of them actually think that hospice... we've even been accused of killing people, people just hear... Sorry.
Hey, you have to be on call. We understand.
But that's the main thing. Well, I might have a right here. That's the main thing is misinformation. They think that hospice is speeding up the death. They think it means giving up. They think that some people actually think it's euthanasia. It's not. All we're doing is allowing a natural death. We're not doing anything to prolong, and we're not in charge. It's up to the patient. Some of them want to have the feeding tubes put in, even though they know that will prolong the symptoms a little longer. It's an individual choice, but I think that most people don't call us in because they think it's giving up. Because they're getting a lot of information from the outside, like continue these treatments and you could last another year or two. And it just kind of depends on where you are in your life and your readiness to go on what you want to do. But I think the main thing is there's a lack of knowledge about hospice and what we are and what we do, because again, when we go and explain it to people, they're like, oh, that's not what I heard, or wish I'd done this sooner, and things like that. So
has there been any patient or experience that you've had that that was especially interesting to personalize or cater to, or that touched you in some way that you'd like to share?
there's been a lot of special things. One of the ones that, I don't know why this always comes to mind, because it's humorous. I had a patient once who had COPD, and she was one of the ones that put off hospice, and finally when she brought us on, and one of the things we do is we have a volunteer program, and this is to give them, above the nursing and the nursing assistant and the social worker and the chaplain, we provide volunteers. Mm-hmm. And she was a quite educated lady, had been a writer, and she ended up with several volunteers. She had one to help her with her editing, one with her art, one with her computer. And when I was sitting there talking to her during the admission, she said, if I'd known I was going to get all this, I would have died sooner. So I just haven't forgotten her, because I thought that was hilarious, because they don't realize all they're going to get, and it just made her life so much easier. And I think with most people, they just said, I couldn't have done this without you. And even if we don't think we did anything but just be there, they knew they had someone to call. I've even had one case where the family had been through a family member death, and she didn't really want a lot of people coming in, and this was not with this company, it was several years ago. She was taking care of her mom. She didn't need anybody to help bathe. She didn't need a chaplain. They had all of that with their family and friends and church. And she said, I just want you guys, so when she dies, I have someone to call. Because when they're on hospice and they pass, the nurse goes out and pronounces, we take care of the phone calls.
Mm-hmm.
It's very peaceful. It's very dignified. Because if you call 911 for something like that, you're going to get the police and the fire trucks and the ambulance and victim services. And it's crazy. And that's not a time when you need craziness. If they're on hospice, then the nurse can go out and pronounce the death.
Okay.
So we go out when we get a call that they have stopped breathing or close to, we go out. When they pass, the nurse pronounces the death. And then here in Travis County, we call the medical examiner, we call the funeral home. We just make the phone calls. And we can offer to make phone calls to family or whoever they want us to do. But the main thing is we come in and take care of all the technicalities.
So that they can
They just
deal with
spend
what
time.
they need to.
They just spend time with their family, and with the person at the time of death is with their family there. So we take care of that. But if they're not on, you have a death of a patient that's not on hospice, you have to call somebody to pick them up. And if it's not been a death registered with the medical examiner or an expected death, then it gets crazy. I mean, it ends up getting settled, but at that time,
That's not what you want to be doing.
no, it can be really crazy.
Oh. Thank you so
Okay.
much. That was some wonderful information. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an awesome job, it really is, so.
Yeah,
Everyone's been saying that,
Yeah.
and you know, I believe you guys.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we hear that a lot of people think, that, that's gonna be hard. Best job I've ever had.
Seem to be the happiest nurses
Yeah.
I've seen,
It's
actually.
very fulfilling because you really feel like you're helping people and making a difference.
We've gotten some amazing information today, especially from a perspective of someone that is not in the field and doesn't know as much about what hospice is. So it's
Right.
just whatever I'd heard about in the past. So we've heard some great things. How long have you been working in hospice care? And what do you do specifically?
Yes, and I help provide spiritual care for the clients and their families. And that doesn't mean I do it, but I hunt it down until I find what is meaningful for them, or do that, or provide it myself with my resources. And I've been with New Century Hospice for 6 years.
Oh, wonderful.
Wow. Oh, wow. Are you a chaplain by trade, or?
I was ordained in my church,
Okay.
so that was a while ago. So, yeah, a lot of people relate to the term chaplain. So it depends on the generation, and depends on the person how I'll present what I do, because we try to be, so fluid and so individualized in the care we give, because it's really all about them.
Yeah.
So if I'll say I'm a spiritual counselor, people sometimes can back off because they don't want counsel. They've never been to a counselor, nothing wrong with me, or if I say I'm a chaplain, then somebody else may say, well, I'm not really interested in religion, but that doesn't actually accurately define what I do. What I